I knew it was over the moment Rebecca didn't make eye contact. That fresh-faced MBA princess, straight off some venture capital ego trip, sat across from me like I was a quarterly expense report that needed trimming. She smelled of expensive vanilla perfume and cold ambition. The name is George Mercer, by the way, 58 years old, and I had just spent 30 years at Apex Security Dynamics writing the very code that made their military encryption contracts worth a damn. Now I was being optimized right out the door. Her first words weren't a greeting or a thank you for 3 decades of service. Instead, she adjusted her designer glasses and said we needed to talk about resource optimization. Optimization. I had spent 30 years building the secure network protocols that kept defense communications safe. And now this kid was optimizing me into unemployment. Rebecca Thorne was 32 years old. She had never written a single line of functional code in her life, but she possessed a Wharton degree and a father with venture capital connections. She flipped open my personnel file like she was scanning a takeout menu. Look, George, you've done solid work here, really, but you've been with Apex for a very long time. We are transitioning to a lean model. We need engineers who are agile, adaptive, and comfortable with our new direction. She offered a plastic smile, the kind that never reached her cold eyes. If you don't feel you fit our updated framework, the exit is right there. I felt a dead calm settle over my chest. I looked at the old team photograph resting on my desk. Half of those engineers were people I had personally hired and mentored straight out of their university programs. I remembered staying up until dawn with them, through server crashes and critical deployment failures, running on stale coffee and greasy diner food. I remembered missing my daughter's wedding rehearsal because our security nodes crashed during a vital federal test. I had fought for their salaries when upper management tried to squeeze every penny. Now this child was handing me a termination packet and a polite pat on the back, so I did not argue, I did not give a speech. I simply closed my laptop, stood up, tucked the folder under my arm, and walked out. I walked past my team, past the glass conference room where people suddenly found their monitors incredibly interesting. I walked past the receptionist who had once asked me to help her son with his engineering homework. Nobody said a word. That kind of silence has a strange weight. It pulls down years of history, respect, and loyalty. But what people like Rebecca fail to understand about engineers like me is that silence is not submission. Sometimes silence is pure strategy. I didn't drive straight home. I stopped at Cooper's Diner down the avenue. I ordered black coffee and took a booth in the corner to think. The place had red vinyl booths, waitresses who had been pouring coffee since the 90s, and the faint greasy smell of bacon on the griddle. I sat there in the booth as the old jukebox in the corner hummed a quiet country tune. My mind drifted back to my late wife, who had passed away 5 years ago, leaving me alone in our big house with just Duke. She always told me to stand my ground when the company pushed. The coffee was strong enough to wake the dead, and the silence there was peaceful. Apex had been my entire life. I joined when we were operating out of a tiny, drafty warehouse in Fairfax back in 1996, when defense work was run by veterans who cared about the mission. I watched the company grow from a 10-person operation to a $750 million defense juggernaut. Every line of the core encryption engine had my digital signature in the code. I didn't document everything in clean manuals. I lived that architecture. It was built on late nights and impossible deadlines. I paid in cash, walked 3 blocks in the cool air to clear my lungs, and then called a cab. I wanted the slow ride. When I got home, the house smelled of old books and dog food. Duke, my golden retriever, greeted me at the door with a wagging tail but cautious eyes. Dogs can sense when the ground beneath you has shifted. I placed the termination folder on the dining table, poured myself 3 fingers of single malt whiskey, and opened a drawer in my study that had remained untouched for over a decade. Deep under old tax returns and manuals was a thick manila folder. It held the original provisional patent application for our encryption core, filed in August 2010 during a chaotic corporate restructuring. My name was listed as the sole inventor and owner. I had filed it under my name on the advice of Julian Vance, my old friend and intellectual property lawyer. File it under your name first, George. Julian had told me over beers, you can assign the rights once they stabilize and compensate you properly. They never stabilized. They just got incredibly profitable, and they forgot to formalize the assignment. The licensing agreement we signed back then was temporary, containing a specific clause. In the event of involuntary termination without cause, all intellectual property rights would revert to the inventor automatically within 24 hours. They never updated the contract because they assumed I would work there until I retired. Rebecca had just pulled the pin on a grenade she didn't know she was holding. I stared at the paperwork on my desk as the afternoon light faded. The document was clear. According to the original agreement signed in August 2010, the transfer of my encryption patent to Apex Security Dynamics was conditional. The key clause sat on page 8 under section 4.2. It stated that if the inventor, George Mercer, was terminated without cause, the license granted to the company would terminate and all rights would revert to the sole inventor within 24 hours of notice. This wasn't a standard corporate clause, but in 2010, Apex was desperate for my code to secure their first federal contract, and they agreed to my terms. I opened my laptop and scanned the document into an encrypted PDF. I drafted a short email to Julian Vance, my intellectual property attorney. I attached the scanned agreement and the termination letter signed by Rebecca Thorne. The timestamp on my termination was Monday at 4:15 p.m. That meant the 24-hour clock was ticking. If we didn't file the reversion notice with the United States Patent and Trademark Office by Tuesday at 4:15 p.m., the transition might get messy. Julian called me less than 20 minutes later. "George," he said, his voice sharp and focused, "I've read the agreement and the termination letter. They didn't offer you a severance package that required you to waive your intellectual property rights, did they?" "No," I replied, taking a sip of whiskey. Rebecca was so eager to get me out the door that she just handed me the standard termination folder. She told me the company was moving in a more agile direction and that my position was eliminated due to optimization. Julian laughed, a dry, short sound. Then she just committed corporate suicide on behalf of Apex. Under 35 U.S.C., paragraph 261, patent assignments or contracts, the reversion clause in your 2010 agreement is fully enforceable. Because they terminated you without cause, the license automatically expires. We need to file the recordation of reversion with the USPTO immediately to make it public record. I'll draft the electronic filing now. You just need to log in and sign it digitally. By 9 p.m., the filing was prepared. I logged into the USPTO portal using my secure credentials. The system prompted me for the patent registration number, 8,472,639. This patent covered the cryptographic handshakes and adaptive noise filtering protocols that kept Apex's secure communication systems impenetrable. It was the backbone of the $750 million next-gen communication platform they were currently pitching to the Department of Defense. Without this patent, Apex could not sell, license, or even demonstrate their technology to the government. I reviewed the electronic form. The transfer type was marked as reversion of rights due to contractual condition precedent. I uploaded the scanned copy of the 2010 agreement, highlighting the termination clause. I attached my termination letter as proof of the condition being met. I paid the $400 electronic filing fee using my credit card, watching the digital receipt pop up in my email client. My digital signature took less than a second to apply. I clicked the submit button at exactly 9:42 p.m., receiving the formal confirmation number instantly. The screen refreshed with a confirmation number. The filing was officially in the queue. Julian had told me that the USPTO database usually updates its public registry within a few hours for electronic recordations. By morning, anyone looking up patent 8,472,639 would see that the owner was no longer Apex Security Dynamics. It was George Mercer. I closed my laptop and walked out to the back deck. Duke followed me, sitting quietly by my side as I looked out at the lights of Fairfax. I remembered back in 2010 when we drafted this agreement. We were sitting in Julian's cramped office, surrounded by stacks of paper. I had just spent 6 months coding the core security module. The company was struggling to make payroll, and the founders were whispering about selling the IP to a foreign tech firm. Julian had looked at me and said, "George, protect your work. If they go under or fire you, you need a way to walk away with your brain intact." That clause was my insurance policy. I never thought I would actually have to use it. For 30 years, I had been the loyal soldier. I had built the foundation of that company, working 80-hour weeks, solving crisis after crisis, while executives in tailored suits took the credit and the bonuses. I had tolerated the shifting corporate culture, the buzzwords, and the gradual exclusion of the old guard who actually understood the technology. But Rebecca's arrogance had changed the rules. She viewed me as a line item, an expensive relic of the past that could be discarded to make the balance sheet look cleaner for her venture capital allies. She didn't bother to read the contracts. She didn't bother to consult the legal archive. She simply assumed that an old engineer would take his box of personal belongings, sign a quiet retirement agreement, and vanish into the background. She was about to learn that you do not dismiss the architect of your foundation. The system I built was mine. It was protected by federal law, and I had just reclaimed the keys. The clock was running, and Apex was driving toward a cliff at full speed, completely unaware that the bridge ahead had been dismantled. I took a deep breath of the cold night air and went inside. The system was armed, and all I had to do was wait for morning. The next morning, the sun rose over a city that had no idea a corporate storm was brewing. I woke up early, made a pot of strong coffee, and sat down at my desk to monitor the USPTO status. At 7:15 a.m., the public registry updated. The owner field for patent number 8,472,639 now read, George Mercer, individual. The legal transition was complete and public. At Apex Security Dynamics, the day began like any other. Rebecca Thorne had scheduled a massive product strategy meeting at 9 a.m. to prepare for the critical Pentagon demonstration scheduled for Wednesday. I knew this because Justin Finch, a senior developer I had mentored, sent me a text message asking if I was available for a quick call. I stepped out onto the porch and dialed his number. George, Justin said. His voice hushed as if he were hiding in a supply closet. We're in the final integration phase for the next-gen platform. Rebecca wants us to push the new build to the demo servers by noon, but we ran into an error in the encryption wrapper. It's the old module you wrote. I tried to access the source repository, but my access was flagged. Do you know what's going on? I took a slow sip of coffee. Justin, I don't work there anymore. Rebecca terminated my employment yesterday afternoon. There was a long silence on the line. What? Justin finally whispered. She fired you? The whole team is sitting in the conference room waiting for her. Nobody told us anything. They said you retired. They lied, I said calmly. And Justin, I'd be very careful about compiling that encryption module. The licensing rights for that specific code reverted to me yesterday. Technically, Apex no longer has the legal right to use or distribute it. I could hear him gulp over the line. He knew exactly what that meant. If he compiled and pushed the build using those specific optimization flags, he would be putting his own name on a direct violation of federal patent law. Before Justin could ask another question, I hung up. I wanted to keep him out of the crossfire, but he needed to know the risks. He was a good kid, and I didn't want him taking the fall for Rebecca's mistakes. The encryption wrapper was the heart of the system. It handled the mathematical transformations that turned raw tactical data into secure noise. If they compiled it without my license, they were committing a federal copyright and patent violation with every single build. By 10:30 a.m., the legal department at Apex finally woke up. A young compliance intern named Logan was doing his routine daily scan of patent registries. Logan was tasked with flagging any changes in intellectual property assets. He was an ambitious kid, hoping to secure a permanent job after graduation. When he typed in the registration number for their core encryption technology, his screen showed my name instead of the company's. He refreshed the page twice, thinking it was a database error, before printing the page and running it down the hall to the general counsel's office. The general counsel, a man who spent more time playing golf than reading contracts, immediately realized the severity of the situation. He felt a sudden sweat break out on his forehead as he stared at the public registry page. He pulled the dusty 2010 agreement from the physical archive and read the reversion clause. He then marched straight into Rebecca's corner office. I was told later that Rebecca didn't even look up from her tablet when he entered. "What is it?" she asked, her tone annoyed. "We have the Pentagon prep meeting in 10 minutes. We have a massive problem, the general counsel said, slamming the USPTO printout onto her mahogany desk. George Mercer just clawed back the core encryption patent. He filed a reversion notice last night. Rebecca glanced at the paper, then let out a sharp laugh. That's ridiculous. George was an employee. We own everything he wrote. It's a clerical error. Tell legal to contact the USPTO and have them correct it. It's not a clerical error, Rebecca, the general counsel replied, his voice tense. I found the 2010 licensing agreement. It has a conditional reversion clause tied to involuntary termination without cause. When you fired him yesterday, you triggered the reversion. The patent belongs to him now. We are currently using unlicensed technology for the next-gen platform. Rebecca's smile faded, replaced by a look of cold anger. Then file an injunction. We are presenting to the Department of Defense tomorrow. We cannot delay this demo. The contract is worth $750 million. We will deal with George after we secure the contract. Just get it done. She was playing a dangerous game, believing that executive authority could bypass federal patent law. She didn't understand that a $750 million contract built on infringed intellectual property wasn't an asset. It was a federal lawsuit waiting to happen. The board of directors, mostly venture capitalists who understood nothing about the technical layers of encryption, would be furious if they found out. The general counsel stood there, dumbfounded by her ignorance, realizing that she was leading the entire company into a legal minefield without a map. He tried to explain the risks of triple damages for willful infringement, but she simply waved her hand and dismissed him from the room. At 11:30 a.m., the phone on my desk rang. The caller ID showed a number I hadn't seen in years. It was General Howard Cole, the retired founder of Apex Security Dynamics. Howard had stepped down from active management a decade ago, leaving the day-to-day operations to board-appointed executives while he lived on his ranch in Virginia. He was a veteran who understood the value of engineering, and he was the one who had signed my original 2010 contract. He was the one who had hired me back in the warehouse days, and he knew that without my protocols, the entire company was just a shell with nice office chairs. Howard had served in the Army Signal Corps, where he learned firsthand that secure transmission is the absolute difference between victory and defeat. George, Howard said, his voice gravelly and direct. I just received a frantic call from the board. They're telling me you've seized the encryption patent. What the hell is going on? Hello, Howard, I said, leaning back in my chair. I didn't seize anything. I simply enforced the agreement we signed 16 years ago. Your new CEO, Rebecca Thorne, terminated my employment yesterday. She called it resource optimization. Under the terms of our contract, my termination without cause triggered the automatic reversion of the patent. Howard was silent for several seconds. I could hear him exhaling slowly, his breathing heavy with frustration. That arrogant girl, he muttered. She actually fired you. Without consulting legal? She was trying to clean up the balance sheet, I explained. She wanted younger, cheaper engineers who were agile. She didn't realize that the core encryption system wasn't company property. It was licensed under a conditional agreement. I'm coming to the office, Howard said. Don't do anything drastic yet, George. Let me handle this. I didn't promise him anything. I simply thanked him for the call and hung up. I knew Howard would try to protect the company he built, but he no longer had the authority to override the legal reality. The patent was mine, and the clock was continuing to tick. Howard arrived at Apex headquarters at 1920 t.m. According to my contacts inside the building, he didn't bother using the executive elevator. He walked straight through the lobby, past security, and marched directly into Rebecca's office. He didn't close the door, and his voice carried down the entire executive suite, turning heads at every desk. Every employee on the third floor stopped typing. The silence was absolute, save for the heavy rhythmic thuds of Howard's boots on the polished concrete. They all knew him. He was the legend who had built this place from nothing, and to see him this angry was a sight none of them had ever witnessed. Do you have any idea what you've done? Howard demanded, throwing the printed patent documents onto her desk. You fired the one man who keeps this company's technology legal. Rebecca stood up, trying to maintain her composure. General Cole, with all due respect, I am the CEO of this company. George Mercer was an overpaid legacy engineer who was resisting our modernization efforts. His departure was necessary for our growth. Modernization? Howard barked, his voice shaking the glass partitions. He slammed his hand on the desk, causing her designer coffee mug to rattle against the mahogany. "You think you're being agile?" he yelled. "You're being stupid. You just gave away the keys to our entire defense portfolio. The next-gen platform runs on George's encryption protocols. The Pentagon demo is tomorrow. If we present that system without George's license, we are committing willful patent infringement against an individual. That's a federal crime, and it will destroy our reputation with the military. We can negotiate a settlement with him later," Rebecca argued, her voice rising in frustration. "He's an engineer, not a businessman. We will offer him a consulting contract to quiet him down." "He doesn't want a consulting contract, Rebecca," Howard said, his tone turning cold and serious. "You insulted a man who gave 30 years of his life to this company. You treated him like garbage. He has no reason to help us. If he decides to file an injunction tomorrow morning, the Pentagon will blackball Apex from defense contracts forever. You didn't just fire an engineer. You fired the company's shield." Rebecca crossed her arms, her knuckles turning white. She tried to maintain her cold corporate stare, but I was told she couldn't hide the quick, nervous darting of her eyes. She remained silent, her face pale but stubborn. She still believed she could outmaneuver the situation. Howard turned and walked out of her office, leaving her alone with the realization that her executive authority was completely useless against a simple contract clause signed long before she ever entered the building. The executive assistants outside her room quickly looked down at their desks, pretending they hadn't heard the founder strip the CEO of her pride in front of the entire office. He didn't say goodbye. He just left her sitting there in the quiet of her expensive office, staring at the printed patent documents that had suddenly become a death warrant for her corporate career. Wednesday morning arrived with a crisp breeze. I sat on my porch, enjoying the quiet as I drank my coffee. The morning sun was warm on my face, and the chirping of the birds in the garden seemed louder and clearer than usual. For the first time in 30 years, I felt a deep, unshakable sense of peace. On my laptop screen, I monitored the news and my email. I knew that the Pentagon demonstration was scheduled to begin at 10 a.m. at the Defense Technology Center in Washington. At 9:45 a.m., Julian Vance sent a formal cease-and-desist letter to Apex Security Dynamics legal department and copied the Pentagon Acquisition Office. The letter stated that Apex was preparing to demonstrate a communications platform that utilized patented encryption technology owned exclusively by George Mercer. It cited patent number 8472-639 and warned that any unauthorized display or distribution of this technology would be treated as willful infringement under 35 U.S.C. Paragraph 271. At the conference center, Rebecca Thorne was standing backstage, adjusting her microphone. The room was filled with military officers, defense officials, and industry journalists. A massive digital display behind the stage read, "Apex Next Gen, secure the future." Rebecca believed she could push through the demo and handle the legal fallout later. She was convinced that the government officials wouldn't care about a minor contract dispute. She walked out onto the stage to polite applause. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice projected through the sound system. "Today, we are proud to present the Apex Next Gen Communications Platform. This system utilizes our proprietary encryption core to deliver unmatched security for tactical operations." As she gestured to the screen to begin the live demonstration, the General Counsel stepped onto the stage from the side. He walked directly to Rebecca, ignoring the murmurs from the audience, and whispered in her ear. "The Pentagon acquisition team has just received a legal notice," he said, his voice trembling. "They are halting the demonstration. They refuse to view a system with disputed intellectual property. We have to shut it down." Rebecca stared at him, her eyes wide with shock. "We can't stop now," she whispered back. "If we continue, we are committing willful infringement in front of the entire Department of Defense," the General Counsel warned. "They will disqualify us immediately." Before Rebecca could respond, the lead military procurement officer in the front row stood up. "Miss Thorne," he said, his voice carrying across the silent room, We have received an official notification regarding the ownership of the encryption protocols used in this system. Until the intellectual property rights are clarified, this demonstration is canceled. The screen behind Rebecca went black. The audience began to whisper and stand up, filing out of the auditorium. Rebecca stood frozen on the stage, the spotlight still shining on her, as the $750 million contract dissolved into nothing. Her face was flushed with embarrassment, and she could hear the quiet rustling of papers as the military officers walked out, clutching the printouts of my patent registration. She was quickly ushered into a small side room by the general counsel, her heels clicking loudly on the hardwood floor as she tried to comprehend the disaster. By 2 p.m., my phone was ringing constantly. I ignored the calls from the board members and the executives. Finally, I accepted a call from Howard Cole. "George," Howard said, his voice sounding tired and defeated, "the demo is dead. The board is in a panic. We need to resolve this. What are your terms?" I opened a drafted email on my laptop and hit send. "I've just sent them to the board, Howard," I said calmly. My terms were simple and non-negotiable. First, an upfront licensing fee of $15 million. Second, an ongoing royalty of 12% on all revenues generated by any system using my encryption patent. Third, a seat on the board of directors with full voting rights. Fourth, a public statement acknowledging my role as the sole creator and owner of the technology. And finally, the immediate resignation of Rebecca Thorne. The board met in an emergency session that afternoon. With their stock dropping and the Pentagon contract on the verge of being awarded to a competitor, they had no choice. They accepted my terms in full. They realized that paying a 12% royalty was better than losing the entire $750 million contract and facing federal prosecution. On Thursday morning, Apex Security Dynamics issued a press release announcing the licensing agreement and the transition of their leadership team. Rebecca Thorne was gone, her career in defense tech finished before it had even truly begun. I walked back into the Apex building on Friday morning, wearing a comfortable flannel shirt and jeans. I didn't go to the engineering floor. I walked to the executive boardroom to take my seat. As I sat down at the table, Howard Cole smiled and nodded at me from across the room. I looked out the window at the city. For 30 years, I had worked in the background, building the foundation while others took the credit. But in the end, the code survived, and the law worked exactly as it was supposed to. It wasn't about anger or revenge. It was simply about making sure they remembered who built the system.